much inspired many of us. I've been hearing stories over the weekend how he's been, you guys have been using his videos to educate others, and he's a great person at giving wonderful commentary on today's current events, and I want to bring him up here. So Jack, come on up and tell us what you're all about.
Well, Jeff is too kind. One thing I'd like to clear up, is this really a late night event, Jeff? Doesn't that take place a little bit later? I can't tell you how encouraging it is to see all of you here tonight. How did you like Ron Paul's speech today? Well, I've been told that tomorrow for the straw poll, and I think it might turn out pretty well for us, I have my fingers crossed, that we should probably line up good and early, well before an hour, to get in there so we can have our voices heard when hopefully the right person wins that straw poll. If y'all want to do that, I think it's a good idea. Well, since the panel tonight is about this movement, what we've accomplished, how far we've come, what we stand for politically, I think considering that we're at the 2011 Conservative Political Action Conference, it might be worth reflecting on what it means to be a conservative, at least in the popular sense, and you know what I mean when I say that. After all, the term is not static. Let's face it, throughout most of the last decade, being a mainstream conservative pretty much meant one thing: support for the war on terror. That's the truth of it. There was little outrage from conservatives when a Republican president doubled the size of government and the national debt, gave us the largest entitlement expansion since Lyndon Johnson in the form of Medicare Plan D, and through No Child Left Behind, he doubled the size of the Department of Education, something that even Ronald Reagan once pledged to abolish. Certainly nothing to cheer there. Under the so-called rubric of compassionate conservatism of George W. Bush, a Republican administration that controlled all three branches of government for a significant period of time delivered virtually nothing that was recognizably conservative, socially, fiscally, constitutionally, otherwise, you name it. It was always easy for conservatives to say, mostly implicitly, but sometimes explicitly, that in a time of war, none of this big government stuff matters. But sadly, for most of the conservative movement, the only thing that mattered in the last decade, let's face it, was support for war, the promotion of it, and complete devotion to a president who was willing to wage it. It was a strange dynamic, considering that conservatives, by the very nature of their philosophy, are supposed to question government, wouldn't you think? And yet just a few short years ago, the right would lash out most viciously at anyone who dared question President Bush and his foreign policy. Just ask Ron Paul. Yes, while strict constitutionalists like Congressman Paul wasn't even allowed in the door at the 2008 Republican National Convention, Al Gore's former running mate, Joe Lieberman, was giving a primetime speaking role. We all remember that very well. Talk host Sean Hannity would constantly call Lieberman his favorite Democrat. And when Hannity wasn't campaigning for a socially liberal Republican like Rudy Giuliani for his presidential campaign, the former New York mayor could always count on conservative cover for men like evangelical leader Pat Robertson, who endorsed Giuliani for president. So why was there so much conservative love for fairly liberal guys like Lieberman and Giuliani? Because they agreed with Bush's foreign policy. Why was there so much vitriol for a genuine conservative like Ron Paul? Because he dared to dissent. Now, working in talk radio during the 2008 Republican presidential campaign, conservative critics would often accuse me of being a single-issue voter in my support for Ron Paul, with that one issue, of course, being foreign policy. But I would tell them that no, in fact, it was they who were single-issue voters. I would tell them that Ron Paul stood for balanced budgets, seriously limiting government, reducing the debt, strict constitutionalism, and he just happened to be right on foreign policy, in my opinion. Why would conservatives, who one would think might believe in balancing budgets, limiting government, debt reduction, and constitutional principles, reject Ron Paul? Well, that's easy. Because of foreign policy. Likewise, why would they even contemplate supporting or championing big government Republicans and former Democrats like Giuliani and Lieberman, who were virtually worthless when it came to bedrock conservative principles? That's also easy, their support for Bush's foreign policy. It was they who were the single-issue voters, never forget that. Most of the conservative movement, it's true, they were the single-issue voters. They say that on the left, but it's true like that. Most of the conservative movement and the Republican Party, simply put, were the war party. It's all they cared about, whether they will admit it or not, and they drew their battle lines accordingly. I would like to say that today, George W. Bush, his war party, I'd like to say that it's finally dead, but unfortunately I can't. What I can say, though, confidently, is that it is in retreat. Now that Iraq and Afghanistan have become Barack Obama's wars and our current president seems hell-bent on growing government to even larger and even more perverse proportions than his predecessor, the conservative movement has suddenly rediscovered the importance of limiting government. I'm not saying that each Republican who now mouths Tea Party rhetoric is serious, nor am I saying that Republicans like John Boehner and Mitch McConnell, who gave Bush everything he ever wanted, have all of a sudden become constitutionalists. What I'm saying is that for the right, the focus is almost entirely shifted. Spending and the debt are now the primary concerns. Blind support for war still exists, but is now at least permissible to question it. If the GOP has become a single-issue party, that issue is now economic. Foreign policy has become somewhat negotiable. I mention this because this is exactly where our movement, this movement, steps in. What movement, you might ask? What is Jack talking about up there? Well, I'm talking about the movement represented on Capitol Hill by serious constitutionalists like Congressman Ron Paul, his son Senator Rand Paul, and freshman congressmen like Justin Amash, who will be joining us tonight. I'm talking about the serious Tea Partiers who have rejected Bush's big government agenda and are now committed to substantively tackling our budget debts and deficits. I'm talking about a movement filled with conservatives who have awakened from the Bush years, wiped the cobwebs from their eyes, and are still wondering what in the hell just happened. I'm talking about a movement that does not take Barry Goldwater's advice concerning how we should advance liberty lightly, and that still takes the founder's philosophy quite literally. I'm talking about a movement made up of many of the people in this room here tonight. In short, I'm talking about a real conservative movement. Yes, after 8 years of Bush, his big government party, and 2 long years of Obama's even bigger government, a real conservative movement has risen as evidenced by not only the newfound popularity of Ron Paul, but also his greater acceptance and influence in the Republican Party. 3 years ago, Paul couldn't even get a spot at the Republican convention. Today, he is arguably the most recognizable and media-sought Republican in the House. Has big government Republicans as horrible as even Lindsey Graham are now lining up to follow his lead in the fight to audit the Federal Reserve, which is funny as hell in retrospect. Paul is also, of course, the chairman now of the Domestic Monetary Policy Subcommittee. Policy is a subject now at least open for discussion, as evidenced by the dissent on the Afghanistan war by everyone from George Will to Ann Coulter to Grover Norquist, but also a good many Tea Partiers who insist that Pentagon spending should be on the budget-cutting table. A recent poll showed that a majority of self-described conservatives think the Afghanistan war is bad for the United States, reflecting American sentiment at large, and those who doubt Paul's influential role in changing conservatives' minds on this subject simply have not been paying attention. In the wake of the TSA basically molesting air travelers, conservatives suddenly rediscovered the importance of civil liberties, doing a complete 180 from the Bush years when they couldn't get enough of the Patriot Act and other unconstitutional intrusions into our private lives. Right. In rejecting TARP, the bank bailouts, the stimulus packages, virtually every conservative now considers the term Keynesian economics a cuss word.